Good morning, everyone. This is the TSMU fan here, and today we'll be reviewing the second Brenner era movie and the second movie to be animated by ARC Productions' Tale of the Brave. Sorry that this video took such a long time to come out. I got sidetracked easily with other projects that I've been working on, so sorry if this one took a bit longer than usual. Anyways, without further ado, let's get into it. The plot of this movie is that while working at the clay pits, Thomas finds footprints embedded in the rocks. He tells Percy about them, which makes him think that there are monsters roaming around the island. He meets an engine called Gator who helps him learn how to be brave. Thomas, James, and Percy now have to find out the mystery of the clay pits and what the monster really is. Now, let's start out with the bad things that were in this movie. The worst part of the movie is the part where Cranky hooks the ship and tries to stop it so that Thomas can talk to Percy. But when Cranky stops the ship and it returns to Brendam, it's revealed that Percy wasn't on the ship when it left. So, what was the point of that scene then? I mean, I do think that Cranky was a real hero for risking everything to save Percy when it was shown that he didn't like him before, but I feel that it could have been approached differently. Like, the scene plays out as it did, where Gator tells Percy that running away isn't very brave. Sorry. But he actually stays on the ship instead of going to the clay pits to look for the monster. Cranky stops the ship and Thomas tells Percy that he needs to talk to him, but Percy still stubbornly ignores him. And before Thomas can get another word in, Percy races off to the clay pits to look for the monster, with Thomas trying to follow behind him. This would have worked a lot better for this movie in my opinion, because having a really tense moment and then tearing it down by revealing something that puts a huge hole in the moment wasn't a very good decision. I also found it strange that during the monsters everywhere sequence of the movie, there was a sequence that felt very Pink Elephants on Parade-esque, but that's just a music video that is very clearly set outside the reality of the movie, so it doesn't really bother me that much. I'll get into the problems of how they've handled that in the future when I review Journey Beyond Sodor. Another questionable thing that I noticed is that when Thomas sees Gator and he tells him that he's going to the docks to catch a ship, how in the world did Thomas mistake Gator for Percy? The two engines look nothing alike. I feel that Thomas at least should have recognized Gator because he saw him when he was at the docks after Percy came rushing in worrying about the monster. But anyways, let's move on. Another thing that I thought was a bit odd is that after James crashes, the narrator says that Percy is happy because Gator was now working on the railway. But after the Tale of the Brave music video, this is proven to be false when Gator says,
"I've just been useful while I was waiting for my ship. And my ship is coming in tonight."
So why would you have the narrator say that when it isn't true? But that's really just a small nitpick that I noticed, so it doesn't really matter. Another small little nitpick that I noticed in the movie is that in the episode Thomas, Percy, and the Mail Train, it's pretty clearly established that both Thomas and Percy take separate mail trains through the night to different stations. The first few times we see Percy taking the mail train, we don't see Thomas at all, but one could possibly argue that he was taking his train somewhere else on the island. But then later on in the movie, when James scares Percy with the scrap monster, Thomas is shown to be sleeping in his sheds instead of helping Percy take the mail train. What was with the change of how the mail train works in this movie? You could at least show Thomas passing Percy at one point, but that just never happens. Thomas is only seen taking the mail train in this movie once, and the only reason that he did it was because Percy wasn't there to normally pull it himself. And you want to know what makes this even worse? Andrew Brenner himself wrote Thomas, Percy, and the Mail Train, so he should know how the mail train works because he wrote the story that introduced it. But as I mentioned earlier, it's a small nitpick, and I don't really have any problems with it. It doesn't really affect the quality of the movie, but it is something that I noticed while I was watching it. Is there anything else wrong with this movie? No! I think that might be everything. So now let's move on to what the positives are in this special. Without a doubt, I really appreciate that they brought back Bill and Ben in this movie. Granted, we don't see Boko at all, but it was nice to finally see Bill and Ben in full CGI, and their voices are very fitting. I also thought that they were portrayed very well, as cheeky and always up for playing tricks on the other engines, but are still able to help someone in need, sort of like how they were portrayed in Heroes. I love the brotherly rivalry they have in this movie, as sometimes arguing back and forth with each other like in Double Teething Troubles. I also really like the music in this movie. movie. Honestly, this special is probably right underneath Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure for best soundtracks to me. My favorite song is, of course, the beautiful piece at the end of the movie. And speaking of that, I thought that they ended this special very well. Just hearing the music swell up accompanied with the lines from the narrator just puts a huge smile on my face. I also really like the opening music, and that saxophone makes it so groovy. The title sequence music almost kind of reminds me of the theme from the Pink Panther now that I think about it. And there are definitely some similarities between the two, with both of them having amazing saxophone solos. But anyways, once again, Robert Hartshorn has made a brilliant soundtrack for a brilliant movie, and I love it. I also really liked how many funny moments were in this movie, most of them being with Marion, but I'll talk about her later when I go over the new characters in this movie. Again, like with King of the Railway, I love how Emily throws back what James said about monsters being hard to see in the dark right back at him. And I love how Sir Topham Hatt says what Annie and Clarabelle said about not always being able to do the jobs you like best in the same scene. Like I mentioned in my top 10 Thomas episodes video, I just love it when characters do that sort of thing. Bill and Ben playing a trick on Thomas and Timothy at the beginning of the movie was also pretty funny, and I love the scene where James meets Gator for the first time and he just runs away like a total scaredy cat. The scene where Bill and Ben scare Thomas was also pretty funny, and I liked the little running gag with the frog in the movie. I also like the scene where Thomas tries to get James to go with him to look for Percy, but James tries to get out of it by saying he was too sleepy. Thomas then retaliates with,
"You're not scared, are you?"
James's eyes pop open, and then we cut to a shot of him traveling with Thomas to the clay pits to find Percy. The humor here is brilliant, and the scene where Bill and Ben argue with each other about their dreams was pretty funny as well. Another little thing that I noticed that I thought was pretty amusing is that when the landslide happens and the rock lands behind James, blocking his path, right as the rock falls down, you can hear Mark Morahan gasp in shock before he says,
Then there was trouble.
I thought that this was pretty funny and was definitely a nice little detail. And with that, I think that might be all the funny moments that were in this movie. Anyways, another thing that I really liked was, again, the subtle references to other Thomas episodes. For example, the angle of James rushing through Wellsworth was a reference to the episode Dirty Objects, when the same angle is shown as James races through the station. A bridge being closed on Thomas's branch line and him getting sent to work with Bill and Ben being a reference to the Railway Series book Thomas and the Twins, where Thomas also gets sent to work with Bill and Ben for the same reason. So Topham Hatt saying bother that telephone being a reference to Thomas in Trouble.
Oh, bother that telephone.
Bother that telephone, said the Fat Controller.
James's accident with the flying kipper being similar to that of Henry's from Something in the Air. Henry even says a line that is similar to a quote from the episode.
You're meant to deliver the fish, not throw them back in the water.
Engines don't swim, Henry. You were meant to deliver fish, not swim with them, said the Fat Controller.
Thomas guessing if Percy was taking a giant balloon on a flatbed being a reference to Up, Up, and Away. The narrator saying that
He had trouble with going past danger signs before.
being a reference to Percy Takes the Plunge. Gordon agreeing with Sir Topham Hatt when he said that Bill and Ben are often known for playing tricks being a reference to the episode Wrong Road, and Sir Topham Hatt praising Bill and Ben for their bravery for saving Thomas in the clay pits was also a reference to Heroes, which Brenner himself wrote. Additionally, James pulling the flying kipper might have been a reference to the Railway Series story Sliding Scales in the book Henry and the Express, in which James also takes the kipper in that book. There were also two nice cultural references in this movie, like how the silhouette of Sir Topham Hatt walking onto the screen at the beginning of the movie was a reference to the intro sequence of Alfred Hitchcock Presents. And when Marion says,
"Oh, alas, poor dinosaur."
that line was a reference to Shakespeare's Hamlet, where a similar line is said. Again, all these subtle references are very nice, and some of them are pretty funny, like how the reference to Up, Up, and Away was sort of Andrew Brenner poking fun at the awful Miller era. That is definitely something that I think the later CGI series did right, especially in the episode Dowager Hatt's Busy Day, where practically the whole episode was making fun of just how bad the Miller era really was. Anyways, I'm getting off topic. Another thing that I thought was very very well done in this movie was the relationship between Percy and Gator. I absolutely love how much Percy respects Gator for being brave, but then Gator also teaches him how to be brave, which leads to him saving James at the end of the movie. Especially after Thomas and Percy have their fallout, I kind of like how Percy treats Gator as his new best friend, which makes you feel bad for Thomas about what he said. Speaking of Thomas and Percy's fallout, let's talk about that. I've said multiple times before in the past that Percy and Thomas are not always friends with each other, and I feel that this movie does a perfect job of handling how they split up. Day of the Diesels was really the first movie where Percy isn't friends with Thomas and instead teams up with the Diesels, but I feel that the fallout was not handled correctly at all in that movie. Percy doesn't even get angry at Thomas or tells him that they aren't friends anymore. Instead, it's portrayed more like Thomas ignoring Percy, and then he makes friends with Diesel 10 just so that he can have someone to talk to since Thomas wouldn't listen to him. Here, I feel like it's handled a lot better than Day of the Diesels. This time, Percy actually does get angry at Thomas for not believing how he saw a monster, and he even says,
"You can stay here on Sodor with the monsters."
which, man, Thomas really got the full force of that, didn't he? I absolutely love how their relationship is handled, and it makes it all the more better at the end when Thomas apologizes and then they become friends again. Again, Day of the Diesels practically did the same thing at the end of that movie too, with Thomas and Percy laughing together, signifying that they are once again friends, but I just feel like the conclusion there was very lazy. In Tale of the Brave, you can actually tell that Thomas feels sorry about what he said to Percy, and then when he apologizes and the two make up with each other, it feels more sincere and well thought out. I absolutely praise the writers for doing this, as it really did seem like Thomas, Percy, and Nicole all over again, and I love it. Another thing that I thought was really well done was the plot. Unlike King of the Railway, which feels very segmented, Tale of the Brave has the story sort of weave around Thomas, James, and Percy, which I thought was very well done. Every event that one of these characters does sets up where the other characters are going to go and what they're going to do. Like how when James first comes into the scrapyard and runs into the scrap metal monster, he later uses it to scare Percy into making him think that he saw a monster. And when Thomas is feeling upset about what he said to Percy, he finds James taking the scrap metal monster away and realizes that he was the one who scared Percy and tells him to apologize, which then of course leads to Percy trying to leave Sodor to be brave with Gator. It all builds upon itself so cleverly, and I absolutely love how every event in this special builds upon the previous ones. Another thing that I liked was how the episode Toad's Bright Idea basically takes place within the events of this special. This is even backed up by the fact that Gator says that he will be collecting a goods train from Duck's branch line, and the fact that stock footage from the movie is reused in the episode for when James sees Gator and gets frightened. I love that they did this, and I really wish that they would have done this more often. Having an episode take place within the events of another special is both really clever and really interesting. I definitely feel like this is one of the highlights of the Brenner era for these reasons. Another thing that I really appreciated was the intro sequence of the movie. The music here is pretty good, and the build up to Bill and Ben's introduction was excellent. I also praise this movie for in this intro they have Oliver make a cameo pulling a goods train next to Duck. I can only imagine that when people saw the trailer of this movie, which features that scene in it, they would get really excited about what role Oliver would play in the movie. They would wonder what he would sound like, how his relationship with Duck is handled, and if Toad was going to appear alongside him. Granted, Oliver doesn't speak at all and only makes a cameo in that beginning part of the movie, and Toad doesn't appear at all. This is a brilliant way on how to handle fan service. Showing these characters that the fans love to see, but not necessarily featuring them in the movie, builds up this real sense of excitement, and then you're left wondering how these characters will play into the plot of the movie. Now, I don't feel that Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure does as good of a job utilizing the fan service characters as well, but I'll talk about that when I review Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure. I also really like how Henry was handled in this movie. This was kind of before the Brenner era made him the token warrior character that he turned into, and I'll talk in detail about my thoughts on this in my next review on The Adventure Begins. But overall, Henry was handled great in this movie, with him laughing at James about his accident and joining the other engines and laughing at Percy when he thinks he saw a monster. He also, in the same scene, backs up what Edward said about there being no such things as monsters. Overall, Henry was used very well in this movie, and I really wish that they could have handled him like this in future episodes and specials. I also liked how, in the same same Tidmouth Shed scene where Percy tells the other engines that he saw a monster, I love how Emily defends Percy and tells the other engines to stop laughing at him. Maybe there could have been a little bit more character development there where Emily gets her own subplot in the movie and helps Percy out, because it isn't really expanded upon in the movie itself. But that's just a small teeny tiny issue because the movie still works really great as it is. And with that, I think that might just be everything good that was in this movie. So let's talk about the new characters. I already talked about Percy's relationship with Gator, so let's talk about the character himself. Gator has a really interesting and unique basis, which is a Columbian steam motor engine built by Centennial Wagon Works Ltd. Unfortunately, all 4 of these engines have been scrapped. Gator being from Columbia is an interesting piece of lore for the character, and surprisingly, Thomas also visited Columbia when he went on his big world adventure. Maybe there could have been some sort of Gator subplot when Thomas was traveling through Columbia, who knows. But anyways, I'm getting off topic. Let's move on to Marion the Steam Shovel. Marion is such a funny and eccentric character, and I love her character a lot. Her voice actor, Olivia Colman, who is a big English star, nails her quirky but fun character perfectly. I just love how Thomas is able to work all these famous personalities into the show, like how George Carlin, Alec Baldwin, Ringo Starr, and Pierce Brosnan have all been narrators before in the past. But anyways, I'm kind of getting off topic, so let's move on. I also really like Timothy, and he's a really interesting character, and I love his interactions with Bill and Ben. I also remember when I watched this movie for the first time and saw Timothy, I was just thinking to myself, ha! Take that, you creepypasta engine that can't exist now! But wait, there are 2 Olivers. Nah! The demon Timothy is just a creepypasta that isn't real. And like Thomas 1 Edward 2 Henry 3 has said before in his top 20 Thomas episodes video, Timothy wasn't in the Railway series. And the model seen in Ghost Train is just Percy's model with some white streamers attached to it. But anyways, let's move on from that. Reg is also a really interesting and fun character, and I like how he interacts with the other characters, like how he shrugs off what James told him about him usually pulling coaches. He's not really anything interesting in this movie, but he's a nice character that fits into the Thomas universe pretty well. I do, however, really like how he's handled in later episodes such as The Truth About Toby. That one really fleshes out his character as a sort of clumsy but eager to work and help the other engines if he can type. With that, that's all the new characters that were introduced in this movie. So let's move on to the miscellaneous things I noticed in the movie. The biggest thing that I noticed from looking on the wiki was that this special was originally going to be called either Tracks to Bravery or The Monster of Sodor. Honestly, Tracks to Bravery is not a bad title. It's definitely closer to the final title, but I totally understand why they changed it, because it doesn't really click, so to speak. Anyways, another thing that I noticed from looking on the wiki was that the US release of this special was slowed down to 24 frames per second, and it adds an extra 2 minutes to the special's length. As a result, the audio is distorted. I just have one question. Why does this keep happening? First Blue Mountain Mystery, then King of the Railway, and now Tale of the Brave. I have no idea why this weird audio stretching problem keeps happening with the US DVD releases of these movies, but I'm really glad that this doesn't happen anymore. It's not really detracting from the movies because all of those movies are good by themselves, but it isn't intentional, and it affects the overall audio quality of the movie. So I'm really glad that they were able to fix this problem in later specials. Another thing that I noticed was that during the scene where Percy asks Thomas if he went back to the clay pits, I love how Thomas is trying to make it seem as if he was already there at the docks by sneaking in while Cranky wasn't looking. His plan gets foiled though as he bumps the trucks too hard and gets Cranky's attention. So then what he does is he says that he had another job to do before coming to the docks, and then Percy comes in and asks Thomas about something he did that wasn't related to any of his usual work. Thomas then looks nervously at Cranky as Percy is talking to him, afraid that he will overhear their conversation, which he does. That was really funny and a nice detail. Another nice little detail that I appreciate is during that same scene, after Thomas tells Percy that the tracks were closed off after the landslide, Cranky slams a crate down onto Thomas's train. That was a nice little bit of realism there, as nobody really does any job 100% perfectly and everyone makes mistakes. I really like that little detail, and I really wish that they could have done more things things like that as the series went on. Another thing that I noticed was that when Percy first tells James about the footprints at the clay pits, before Percy puffs away, James looks smug after calling Percy a scaredy engine. But then after Percy leaves James behind, he looks very worried and is questioning if there really is a monster. That was a really nice detail, and reminds me of those really cool editing tricks in the classic series of Thomas, with examples such as The Runaway and Gordon and Spencer. I really like these sort of editing tricks, and I really wish that they did more of them in the series. Another thing that I noticed was well, I can't think of anything else. And the wiki doesn't really list any interesting facts about this movie other than what I've already said. So I guess I'll end the video here. This movie was definitely a big step up from King of the Railway, and I love the improvement here in this special. But little did us Thomas fans know that the best was yet to come. But that's another story. Tale of the Brave was a brilliant movie, and was definitely a tale to remember. Anyways, that's the end of this video, and make sure to be on the lookout for my review on The Adventure Begins, which is coming up next. Thanks for watching, and make sure to like and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this one. This is the TSMU fan signing out.